This is Doug DeMuro, and today we are going to talk about my 7 favorite supercars of all time. I have ranked my very favorite supercars. I've driven a lot of these cars now, and I have decided to rank my very favorites. And so I'm going to go through my top 7, and then I'm going to cover why some supercars didn't make this list. So let's get started. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era. We've had some amazing sales recently on Cars and Bids, including this 2007 Shelby GT500, which sold for over $81,000. It had just 100 miles on it, a record price for one of these. Also, this NA Mazda Miata with a Chevy V8 swap sold for $27,000, and this Toyota Land Cruiser Heritage Edition brought $93,000. If you're looking to sell your cool enthusiast car, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. You'll get the most interest and views and bids on your car. And if you're looking to buy a cool car from the modern era, the 1980s and up, check out Cars and Bids with a great selection of daily auctions at carsandbids.com. Okay, so supercars. I don't really think about supercars all that often. I prefer my wagons and my weird cars and that kind of thing. But it hit me the other day. I've driven a lot of these, and I really have the ability to make this comparison, like which are my favorite supercars from someone who spent time in all of them. So I'm going to give you my top 7 favorite supercars of all time. Number 7, the Vector W8. I'm going to start with the flaws of this car, namely that it has a modified General Motors V8 and a 3-speed automatic, unquestionably flaws, and that they only made 20 of them, and so you can't get it serviced anywhere, so it is not a rational vehicle, but it is, in my opinion, the craziest looking car ever manufactured at any point, the most aggressive, daring, insane looking car ever made. And I reviewed one a long time ago, and it was just the coolest thing in the world, and I still think about how exciting and just special that car was. And I just think and it also has one of the most insane interiors ever made because it has a fighter jet style screens. Totally deserves to be on my top 7, even though the performance isn't really there, everything else is. Okay, number 6, favorite supercars of all time, the Pagani Zonda. Now, it's for those of you who know me well, it's kind of surprising to have this car on this list at all because I'm not into these hypercar manufacturers all that much, Koenigsegg and Pagani and all that stuff. It's so out of reach. They make such low production volumes. It's just not really my thing. And I felt that way until I drove the Zonda. And then I did drive it, and I realized that it was one of the great driver's cars that I've ever been in. In addition to being a low production hypercar that's quadrupled or 10x really in value, it's an amazing drive. The clutch and shifter were fantastic. The mid-engine, the weight of the car, the steering feel, the precision. I was blown away. I was expecting the car to be intimidating and scary like most hypercars are. Instead, it was please drive me faster, have more fun, throw me in corners, everything's great. And I loved that car. And so not only is it an amazing car, from a whoa standpoint, but it's also actually an amazing car to drive. Easily earns a spot on this list. Okay, number 5, favorite supercar of all time, the Lamborghini Diablo SE30. This car was built to commemorate 30 years of Lamborghini making cars. Came out in the mid-1990s. And I just think it's one of like the Vector, one of the most daring looking cars of all time. The regular Diablo was pretty insane looking, but the SE30 kind of took it to the next level. And most of them were purple, which is a color that nobody, a lavender purple called 30th anniversary purple or 30 purple. And that's a color that most people can't get away with. Most brands, if this car had been purple, we'd kind of laugh at it. And that's true of a lot of cars. But that car, nobody messes with the Diablo, okay? It was just a really special car. And I think it was the very best version of the Diablo, which a lot of people could argue was sort of the last crazy Lamborghini before, Audi, Volkswagen took over and made the cars better, but more rational. The Diablo 6.0, the later version of that car, was a better overall vehicle, but the SE30 to me was just the most intense and insane looking, and they were very rare and they're very valuable now, but that's really, really a very special car. And on my list here of the top 7 supercars, the only one I've never reviewed. I would love to get some seat time in a Diablo SE30. A couple of years ago, I considered maybe buying one instead of my Ford GT. I wish I had. They're now double what they used to cost, and I think they might be out of reach forever. But there's a good reason for that because it's a truly special car and one of the, in my opinion, one of the best and most iconic Lamborghini models of all time. Okay, number 4, my favorite supercars of all time, the McLaren F1. Now you might be surprised that this car doesn't go higher on this list, because there's a lot to love about it. The 3-seat configuration, incredible rarity. It was the fastest production car in the world for like a decade. I mean, it's a truly special car. And I really do love it. I think it is like one of the great cars of all time. But I think one of the problems is that prices of these cars have now gotten so insane. They're selling for $20 million that I'm just sort of not as into it as I used to be. You're never gonna see one. You're never gonna encounter a real car enthusiast who has one because they're now so valuable that real car enthusiasts are kind of priced out. And people are buying them now as like a showpiece, like, you know, the 250 GTO to an extent. Like buying the best of something, having the coolest, just to have it as like an ultra wealthy person's showpiece, like a trophy house, or when the Magna Carta sold, and I think Bill Gates bought it. Like, it's something like that. It's become almost like that. And frankly, the discussion around the values of the car has eclipsed whatever made the car special. And so this is an amazing car. It's great. It's one of the very best. But I don't know, it's just, it doesn't quite have the same allure. I mean, it was always incredibly expensive, but now that it's $25 million, you're on a different level of insane that kind of makes it no longer like recognizable as a car even. Okay, number 3, favorite supercar of all time. This will surprise a lot of people. McLaren Speedtail. I am on the record saying that new McLarens, there's too many of them, they're confusing, it's boring, people don't like them. That's all true. There are too many, the whole thing is kind of stupid, but the Speedtail is really cool. So the Speedtail is like the modern version of McLaren F1, kind of the long tail F1, and it's incredibly aerodynamic, ridiculously cool looking, has some amazing features like the spoiler curves up on the body. It's not a separate panel. The body of the car curves up, the spoiler. Like, it's incredible. It has 3 seats. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of technology. I reviewed one of these recently, went through everything. It charges on a charging pad. You don't plug it in. You just park it on a charging pad because it's a plug-in hybrid. And I just think, you know, there's a lot of hypercars and supercars being made right now. And so this one is, they're all kind of like lost in the shuffle. Nothing is emerging as like the car, like the Veyron did in the mid-2000s. But to me, the Speedtail is the car. And I think in 50 years, we're gonna look back on that as like one of the pinnacle vehicles from this era. And I really find it to be special. Okay, number 2, favorite supercar of all time, that would be the Ferrari F40. The F40, how do you not, I mean, it's probably the most iconic modern Ferrari ever made. Certainly the most iconic Ferrari of the supercar era. And it's definitely my favorite Ferrari. And I have to say, it's not as good to drive as the F50, which was like the next Ferrari supercar. But the F40 is more special, it's better looking, it's more iconic, it's more of a truly amazing and incredible car. And I love the F40, and I just think it absolutely deserves a place on anybody's list of the top supercars, unless they're just trying to be contrarian, as a lot of people are. And finally, my number 1 favorite supercar of all time, I've said this many, many times, that would be the Porsche Carrera GT. It is really a special car. I've gone on and on about this. I'll link my video in the description below. You can watch me talk about how much I love the Carrera GT, but I really believe it was sort of the high watermark of combustion engine cars. This amazing V10, manual transmission, kind of the end of the line of like do-it-yourself fun supercars. And it was just one of the most incredible and special vehicles ever made. And I'm not really that much of a Porsche person, like a huge Porsche enthusiast, but this particular car I really think was an absolute pinnacle point for Porsche and for supercars in general. And based on all the troubles that Porsche has had since this car came out, with all the lawsuits because it's been such a deadly and dangerous car, I suspect we'll never really see another car quite like this ever again. So those are my top 7, but you might be more interested in wondering why some supercars didn't make my top list. Like I've said, I've driven most of these cars, so why aren't they on there? Okay, first thing, if this was a top 10 list, there would be 3 more, which would be the Ford GT, the one that I have, the Maserati MC12, which I think is just totally insane, and the Bugatti Veyron or Chiron, I'm not really sure, one of those 3. Those would be kind of like my next 3 on here. Ford GT I really think is an incredible car to drive, really special, and it's like the last accessible kind of iconic car that isn't just $1 zillion. Maserati MC12, incredibly rare, ridiculous looking, love those cars, I think they're insane, would love to review one. And the Veyron Chiron, to me, the Chiron I like better, but the Veyron was more iconic. I mean, these cars really played a huge role in like starting the world of the hypercar, and they still are kind of the king. They can do it all, speed, performance, and luxury. They're incredible. So those would be my next 3. But some cars I wouldn't have on a top list of supercars that I love the most. And I'm gonna start with the Jaguar XJ220 and the Bugatti EB110. I love both of these cars. I've done reviews on them. I wanted to do reviews on these cars more than almost anything, but For one thing, they're not the most amazing vehicles to drive. XJ220, EB110 I didn't drive that much, but XJ220 I drove pretty hard. It's fine, but you're always kind of worried about stuff breaking. Feels kind of like a first effort 90s supercar, which is what it was for Jaguar. Parts are impossible to find. They're starting to feel old. The look isn't quite there. They're not like a top car. They're really cool. They're really interesting. And any serious collection of supercars should have one of each, but it's not one of the best. Also not on this list, Porsche 959. I've never been that into the 959, truthfully. I reviewed one, it was the coolest thing in the world. It had some amazing features, but I think it's ugly. I think it looks a lot like a 911. I think they're kind of overpriced. They didn't make a lot of them. They've never really been incredibly valuable compared to contemporaries. You know, the big comparison was always F40 or 959. Well, F40s have always been more valuable, even though they made like 6 times as many. It's because it's more desirable. And the 959 to me was just never that interesting or desirable of a car. The Mercedes CLK GTR is another car that's not on this list. This car it's kind of coming up in status recently. A lot of people had no idea what that was for a long time, but for some reason, some have started to appear on social media, and people are kind of getting into those. I love that car. It's too rare though for me. They only made like 35 of them, I think, and it's not really a frequently drivable car. They really were race cars for the road. They're this high off the road. There's no way to go over anything. If you hear them driving, you can hear like they feel like race cars. They're not geared for comfort. You sit in them, they're very loud, they're very rough riding, very, very tight suspension. They're not really intended for real use. And I think they're incredible cars, but they wouldn't make this list. New 4 GT, not on this list, might be surprised since I have the old one. I truly feel that the new 4 GT is like a little too racy. Like the old 4 GT, the cool thing about it was it's a manual transmission car, easy, surprisingly easy to drive. The new one is it's too race car for the road, at least for me. You're sitting so tight in there, it's very rough. There's a lot of compromises made. And the old one didn't require that as much. And to be totally honest, I actually prefer the old 4 GT to the new one, even though the new one costs $1 zillion more, and I'm not supposed to say that, blah, blah. But the new 4 GT is a bit too compromised for my taste. And also not on this list is some of the more modern supercars and hypercars. 918 Spider, LaFerrari, Koenigsegg. To me, 918 Spider and LaFerrari are too common right now, which is crazy to say, but the simple truth is they're not. You go to crazy car events and you'll see at least a couple, right? Like, it's not like an XJ220 where it shows up anywhere and it's an occasion, or like a Zonda, you know? 918 and LaFerrari, they're relatively new, they're relatively drivable, they're still kind of the hot car, people are around in them. And to me, it needs a little bit more like excitement factor to get me into them. And plus there's the component of they're not that old. They're not old enough to kind of have developed a reputation. Like the F40 has become an icon over all these years. The Carrera GT, same. Zonda, same. That car wasn't anything until maybe 10 years ago. And I really think 918 LaFerrari, they need a little bit more space. Koenigsegg, those are amazing cars, truly incredible vehicles, but they're so expensive and they're so rare. They make so few of them. And I don't know, I hear people have issues, reliability issues with them. I don't have a lot of confidence. I think that's a very cool car and it's very special, but it's just not one of my very top. They're just so uniquely built, so low volume. It's just not really my thing. Carrera GT to me has always been special because they made so many and were still able to make an incredible car. I've always felt that it's a little bit easier when you make kind of one-offs as Koenigsegg more does. Not that they're not unbelievable cars. It's just not quite my thing. Such a like rare, low production, like kind of fragile, you know, everything could break, everything is made in-house. It's all kind of a lot to deal with and so expensive. But there you go. Those are my top 7 supercars of all time. Having driven a lot of supercars, though, to me, those are the ones that I like the best.